welcome back from coffee. I'm David Walmsley, Editor-in-Chief of the Globe and Mail in Canada, and it's a distinct pleasure to be here and part of this event honouring the great Harry, who I have thought a lot about recently in terms of how would he handle the challenge, the opportunities, and the disadvantages that come with artificial intelligence, automation, and the computer. Can it be our friend? Is it a foe? Is it somewhere in between? So to help answer those questions, I'm joined here by three incredibly qualified people. Beside me is Manisha Ganguly from The Guardian, a pioneer in using open source investigations to expose what may be the most challenging and consequential cases to document, that of war crimes, and is also a two-time Amnesty Award winner. Catherine Gicheru, a trailblazer in fighting disinformation and bringing data journalism to underrepresented issues and communities in Africa. Pleasure. And finally, Chris Brauer, Director of Innovation, also works at Goldsmiths College in London, who's been thinking about AI for 15 years, which is probably longer than anyone else in the room. So I'm going to start with you, Chris. You advise newsrooms on how they can integrate AI tools. In what ways are you already seeing newsrooms use AI?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting time because, you know, the immediate opportunity that's being applied, the business cases are shaping around productivity, efficiency, effectiveness, and therefore a lot of it relates to, you know, something that's more similar to the previous wave of innovation, which was robotic process automation and straightforward automation of business tasks. And those business cases are made around taking cost out of the system. And by cost, we typically mean human labor out of the system. And therefore, the impact has been, you know, one that, you know, newsrooms have been reluctant to embrace wholeheartedly because they can see the risks associated with embedding these technologies across and basically displacing human labor with the technology. But in parallel to that, there's been a very, you know, quite exciting and inspirational area. I think, you know, the newsroom has benefited from the fact that, you know, having gone through such a significant disruption from the traditional analog media to the digital newsrooms and the sort of 10 years of pain and suffering and transition that was involved in that, a lot of lessons were learned, and that was that we need to capitalize on the opportunities that these kinds of technologies offer at an earlier stage. We don't want to wait around until someone else cannibalizes our markets or takes opportunities away from us or displaces the value that we offer. And it's been fascinating to see the examples of this in action, because what you're starting to see is you know, a kind of a new knowledge class of journalist, one that is AI enabled, and is starting to create quite remarkable new ideas around how they might be able to apply these technologies, not just to do what they do already more effectively, but to do new and kind of more exciting and bigger opportunities to open up new markets, new ways of practicing journalism.
And in your experience, do you find that the industry is supportive, or are they falling into the old bad habits of legacy, which is to say, don't worry about us, we're doing just fine, thank you very much?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of trepidation because of the experiences that, you know, particularly because anything you do in this space at the moment is largely dependent on partnering with these very large platforms, these very large technology companies. It's very difficult to do any of this in isolation. It's incredibly expensive, but you know, these capabilities that these technology companies offer are democratically available to any organization of any scale and size, and you get the full power of the platform at your disposal. So you're starting to see organizations, you know, recognize through small pilots and experiments that, you know, there is a significant opportunity here. But otherwise, there's also a lot of cynicism and a lot of perception of AI as a threat, not just to the workforce, but to the truth. And you know, it takes a lot of fine-tuning and a lot of work to work with these systems in a way that effectively reduces some of those risks associated with displacing labor and with the veracity and the quality of the information that you're able to produce. So you have to commit, and there are very few media organizations in my experience who are sort of stepping boldly into this space with an idea that it's going to result in in a significant restructuring of how the newsroom functions, but that it's going to come out in a potentially much more powerful way, and in a way that will open up new opportunities for transforming the capabilities of newsrooms.
Now, Manisha, you describe yourself as a techno-skeptic. You did a PhD on this precise issue, essentially testing whether or not you could put yourself out of a job. Yeah. You clearly have not been successful at that. So tell us a little bit about your journey and where you've gone to and where you've got to now in terms of your sense of the influence of AI and whether it's going to be a force for good.
Well, I'm biased because my PhD was looking at whether automated tools and artificial intelligence was going to impact investigative journalism. And I also am the open source investigative lead at The Guardian, so I use a lot of these tools to augment my work. But I am fundamentally a techno-skeptic, and what I found in my PhD that it is possible to automate some tasks. It is not possible to automate the work of an investigative journalist, which is my job, and the jobs of a lot of people here, and I'll explain why. So what we call artificial intelligence is essentially advanced statistics. We're calculating probability, but the thing that's new about this is that we suddenly have these massive data sets, and we suddenly also have the processing power to crunch these data sets, which means that the probabilities that we're getting out of it are more accurate and can be used to predict reality. A really good example of this is ChatGPT and predictive text. It's easy, it's free. But the way it's impacting the industry is in a couple of ways. With respect to news, my mentor, Nick Davies, who spoke here last year, coined a term called churnalism, which is in a lot of these newsrooms, you'll have some breaking news reporters who'll sit there and who'll rewrite wire copy from Reuters and AFP. Now, that job, with the rise of ChatGPT, can be successfully automated. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying that because it doesn't affect my job. Because a lot of the misinformation that we see online is a result of journalism, and also a lot of the information pollution that we're seeing online is as a result of it as well. But the good thing about that is I found that AI is not very good at a couple of things. One is it's not very good at news judgment, which means things like news curation is always better received when it's done by humans. It doesn't have the instinct of an investigative journalist, which means it won't be able to predict things, and it also doesn't have creativity. And the reason why it boils down to one simple thing, which is that computers go from A to Z. They can only think in a linear fashion, whereas humans perform what I call tangential thinking. It's basically Archimedes lying in his bathtub and then jumping out with Eureka. The bathtub had nothing whatsoever to do with this hypothesis. And a lot of the time, that is what investigative journalists do. We use creative ways to use pre-existing tools, a lot of which I use for open source, to come to conclusions using data which support human testimony. That is not to say that this can immediately replace humans, because the fundamental thing with investigative journalists is you need to have trust with your audience. And there has been a massive rupture of trust between the media and the public, starting from the Iraq WMD scandal to the Trump presidency to the current disinformation crisis. And if we want to instill that trust back in the public, we need humans to be monitoring what the machines are doing. Partly because these machines are not infallible. What I found in my open source reporting is that they come up with false positives, and you always need a human eye to go look things over. A really good example is when you're looking at satellite imagery and something that looks like a crater could actually just be a cloud. I've seen that disinformation being published on Twitter and circulating. And then the other problem that we're seeing is because of the rise of generative AI, there has been a flood of deepfakes. And this affects journalism in two ways. One is it's making the process of verification a lot harder, because the internet is flooded with what I call information garbage, which means the cost, the time, and the tools needed to verify something is exponentially greater and increasing day by day. And then the second thing is that it creates this very obvious excuse. I'll give you an example. There was a fairly incriminating audio of an Indian politician, which was leaked, I think, last year. And the politician basically came out and denied it. It was published by reputable journalists and said it's a deepfake. Now, the deepfakes basically enable you to create this excuse that when a journalist is trying to hold you to account, when something unsavory comes to light, it gives you the power to easily dismiss it as a deepfake. And the problem with deepfakes is with digital images, we're still at the stage where you can tell, sort of, if it's AI generated or not, and reverse image search works pretty well. But if you're looking at audio, there is no way to watermark an audio deepfake. What we saw happening a couple of months ago with the Joe Biden robocalls is a perfect example of how this can explode in the future, because there is a seemingly endless library of audio samples that the AI can be training on. And this in turn sort of gives rise to issues like privacy, the intellectual property of journalists, and sort of how it's turbocharged by capitalism.
One of the organizations, Adobe, has put together the Content Authenticity Initiative to try and help with the metadata of photography, which could help. But Catherine, you have another challenge, which is the subsets or the data sets or the large language modeling that is used is generally done through the English language. Now, you have worked with 12 to 15 countries. Now you have the largest fact-checking organization in Africa through PesaCheck. Could you explain a little bit about the work that you've done on that, because it's foundational stuff?
Okay, I started PesaCheck because, by the way, PesaCheck means fact-checking money, because I was interested in budget and public finance, where is our money going? But once we started it morphed into this humongous animal called PesaCheck, which is now in 12 countries and publishes fact checks in 3 languages, English, French, and Amharic. Why Amharic? Yeah, Ethiopia. And when we decided to do Amharic, it's because of the problems that were going on in Ethiopia at that time. The way we do it, the biggest challenge obviously is, like you said, you need to throw this thing back. You need to fact check with a lot of data. A lot of data is not in English. The kind of data we need is not either in the language you need it in, either it's not collected in Amharic, or even if it's collected in Amharic, it's not in a usable in a way we can use it. So you need to kind of start from the beginning, go back to Genesis before you get to Revelations. Sorry to be flippant, I apologize for the religious ones here. But it really sounds like that, because you need to start creating the data sets yourself, or translating them, and then breaking it down in a way that you can then say, I'm going to use, like you say, throw technology at it, and it tells me what is it that I'm seeing, and make it easier. And so that is one of the biggest challenges.
And you've done that specifically in training women journalists around data when it comes to maternal health.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit on that? Because I think that's something that many in this room would love to copy.
What happens is that we don't get, in the countries that we're working in, 8 countries in Africa and in most other African countries, data which is gender disaggregated is not available. If it is there, when it comes to maternal child health or anything to do with issues that affect women, we need to go back again to the drawing board, which is where we need to either start collecting data ourselves, in the sense that we start collaborating with with health organizations. Where we find the data, sometimes we actually work with research institutions to try and see what data, when they're doing their research, they've been able to collect. In most African countries, Kenya is one of them actually, we have what we call the DHS, which is the health program, which is supported by the US government. It does give you up-to-date, but not complete data. So again, you have to go back to what I call lo-fi, high-impact kind of strategy, which is where you look for verifiable information through old-school style. Again, lo-fi, high-impact, that's my thing, because I'm not going to throw technology at some problem which is not going to be solved by technology. So we usually collect data like that. The other thing is also scraping. We do a lot of scraping of data so that we can create the databases which we then make accessible to our women journalists, the women journalists we're working with, and also try and make it accessible to to other journalists. And the reason for this, especially like in Kenya, we are good. I think we're fantastic. We do have a lot of data, but in some countries you don't have data. And when we started AWJP in 2020 is when it hit me, boop. I made assumptions that I had to go back to the drawing board and kind of rethink. And this was because at that time, there was no COVID in Tanzania. The previous president said there's no COVID, so there's no COVID. But we needed to know how many people are getting sick, dying from this. And we couldn't ask, because Tanzania is an interesting country, but it's a very beautiful place in terms of the challenges that we've been facing. We find new ways of addressing them. So to get the data on how many people are getting infected with COVID, we couldn't ask the question COVID. We wouldn't use the word COVID, we'd use in direct translation from Kiswahili, it's the big cough. They call it the big, whether it's pneumonia or whatever. We'd use the big cough, and the doctors understood. So they would tell us, oh, I've been treating 50 people today with a big cough. Same time last year before COVID, I only used to see two.
So
and then you'd be able to kind of do, it's anecdotal, yes, but you'll be able to draw correlations in terms of when you say big cough, is it the same cough as the usual cough? You go into these details. So that then you'll be able to write the story. The Tanzanian journalists were then able to write the story about big cough without using COVID. Okay. And then people will be able to say it's actually getting worse because we're getting more people with big coughs.
Okay.
Yeah, so in a way, you need to be creative in how you collect information. And I keep on telling people it's like when we were under a very bad political regime, you as a journalist, you learn how to write so that people can read between the lines and know what you're saying, because you can't say black is black, white is white. You need to write it in such a way that your audience understands what you're saying without saying it.
Okay.
Because you need to be...
We're running out of time already, which I can't quite believe. Chris, you prosecute something that is one of my favorite words, the word hunch, the journalist hunch. How does the journalist hunch work when it comes to AI?
Yeah, so, some of the most exciting examples that we've got right now that are really inspiring, I think. So Hunch is a system, it's built on something we call RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. It's a way that you take a curated data set and you fine-tune a model like ChatGPT. And by pointing the system at a carefully curated data set that represents sources that are reliable, that the journalist trusts, you're able to test a hunch that the journalist has against that data set and generate a statistical probability whether or not that hunch is correct. And in the processes that we've undertaken around this, journalists are testing 30, 40 hunches a week, trying to evaluate different directions of travel. You also will receive a very strong rationale for why the probability exists around that hunch. And it's two jobs for the journalist there. One, to identify the curated data set that they want to rely upon. These are these information sources that I trust, and I only want the system looking at these sources. I don't want the system looking beyond to other training data, unreliable, untrustworthy, deepfake data, and so on. And then also to be creative with the notion of how you instruct the system to test the hunch. And if you instruct it in different ways, you'll get different levels of reliability. Synthetic data, another very powerful area, incredible at the moment. All the driverless vehicles and so on have been taught on synthetic data, the enormous leaps we've seen in generative AI applied to health diagnosis. Systems were at 30% reliability 18 months ago. They're at 84% now on basic conditions. That exceeds the level of the top performing physicians in the United States in the tests. A lot of this work is going on in Google, for example, where they're progressing this remarkably using synthetic data. So you have a small, reliable data set, and then you produce enormous volumes of synthetic data off of that allows the system to keep training. By 2030, we'll have run out of all data that was generated in the history of human civilization. All of it.
Okay.
So So it's a very exciting time to be in a position where you say, well, how will the systems continue to learn to drug discovery, continue to learn to deal with these conditions, these wicked problems that we face? It's up to, I think, a lot of newsrooms to consider the implications of becoming trusted sources of not just the data that you produce, but synthetic data that's produced off the back of that data that reflects the reliability and the trust of that original data. All these things are so exciting, and they help propel things moving forward so quickly. And they play at the core responsibilities of the journalist, which is, can I identify something that's trusted? Can I ask the system to perform this remarkable big data analysis at speed? It takes milliseconds to perform a hunch evaluation. How long in the career of the journalist does it take to come up with that hunch in the first place? Bang, test it again, change it, test it again. You don't have to invest resources in conducting an investigative report until you get to a point where you're getting solid and reliable, high confidence that you're on the right track. And from that point forward, the opportunities abound.
It's a talkative group. We're out of time. I can't believe it. I want to thank Chris, Catherine, Manisha. If you get a chance, have a look at some of the work Manisha and The Guardian did, Operation Vulcan, Operation Jorge. Very important work, really strong and impressive leadership. And I'd like to thank you all. Thank you.